is caffeine really bad for you? Before we begin, I wanted to give kind of a little bit of context of what caffeine is. Caffeine in itself is essentially a stimulant drug. So a lot of people don't really consider caffeine as a drug. Well, caffeine actually is a drug, and it's a stimulant drug. And what that means is that it basically kind of revs up your central nervous system to make you more alert, make you more focused, and a lot of people know this. But with that said, some people don't know or realize that it is actually considered a drug. So that is something I wanted to preface. In addition to this, about 80% of US adults consume caffeine, usually from coffee sources, but some type of caffeine daily. That's a pretty high percentage. I would assume this is pretty standard across the world, as caffeine is widely available to a large amount of individuals. It's also very cheap, so even in quote-unquote non-developed countries, you can still get caffeine pretty widely available. And I also too want to mention that when I'm talking about caffeine in the context of the rest of this podcast and the rest of this little clip, caffeine and coffee often are very correlated, as in a lot of the data is done on coffee drinkers just because a lot of people drink coffee and it has caffeine in it. But with that said, there are some health benefits to drinking coffee independent of the caffeine in it. So basically that's kind of a preface of there might be a little correlation versus causation here. And that's kind of one of the big things with a lot of this research. It'd be nice if it was strictly done in just caffeine, but unfortunately a lot of it is tied to coffee consumption, which usually has caffeine, unless you're drinking decaf, of course. So with those things said, what are some side effects of drinking caffeine or coffee? Let's just look at caffeine though. So one of the things that people often note is sleep disturbances. And this is probably one of the biggest things. And a lot of times people will even say to me too, like, Logan, I can drink some coffee right before I go to bed and I'm completely fine. I don't feel like I'm, tired at all the next day or whatever. I can fall asleep fine. This may be true, but unfortunately, when you drink caffeine, it can actually mess with your sleep quality. So you may be getting to sleep and you may be in bed for a certain amount of time, but your overall sleep quality will be greatly detrimented, right? So basically what that means is that you're not going to be able to repair or have the most restorative sleep that you could if you didn't ingest caffeine prior to going to bed. And we'll talk a little bit later about how long caffeine can actually stay in your system, as this will kind of give you a good ballpark of when you maybe should stop drinking coffee or caffeine. But that's a big thing. Also too, a lot of people will drink caffeine throughout the day to get them by, which then makes them more tired, which will then make them, of course, have kind of worse sleep. So it's this never-ending cycle of, I'm drinking coffee to get me through the day, but I might drink it too late in the day, so then I'm going to fall asleep and have poor sleep. Then when I have poor sleep, I'm going to be tired, so then the next day, you get the gist. Caffeine can have some sleep disturbances. In addition to this, you could have some energy fluctuations throughout the day. If you drink caffeine too early in the day, this actually messes with your body's ability to get rid of adenosine, which is something that kind of makes you sleepy and tired. And if you have it too early in the day, this is usually when people wake up, they drink a bunch of coffee, and that's like maybe 30 minutes or an hour after waking. And then they have that crash later in the day. This crash is the adenosine actually showing up in your body because you weren't able to clear it, because that caffeine actually kind of blunts adenosine clearing from the body. So energy fluctuations, especially if you're drinking it right early in the day, simply because that adenosine clearing. In addition to this, caffeine is a diuretic, as it can dehydrate you. With that said though, this is usually if you are just taking caffeine in like a pill form or a supplement form. If you are drinking caffeine that's, well, literally drinking caffeine, if you are taking caffeine in a drink such as coffee, tea, or maybe even an energy drink, this doesn't really have the same effects of dehydrating you because you are actually taking some fluids in with that. It's really just kind of a issue if you are just taking it in that pill form, which is really where you could get in some trouble. So if you are taking it with a pill, you can get it in pills. Try to drink something with it. Have 16 ounces of water, maybe even a little bit more. This can kind of counteract some of those negative health benefits of being dehydrated when drinking caffeine. Also too, some people will start to build up a tolerance and dependency on caffeine, where this can kind of get some addictive properties. Caffeine isn't fully addictive, but you know, a lot of people might feel like, I need my coffee to wake up in the morning, or I need some caffeine to wake up or go to the gym or all these things. And although it does have its time and place, you know, if you are saying to yourself, hey, I need this, that's where you can get into some issues with kind of your verbiage and your thoughts around overall caffeine consumption. You can start to build some dependency, which of course would be considered a negative in most lights. Also too, caffeine can increase your anxiety. As we discussed at the beginning of this, it is a stimulant drug. And anytime your central nervous system is being stimulated, heightened, or you're becoming more aroused, this can increase your overall alertness, but also alertness and anxiety, kind of the same thing. You're very focused, you're looking around, you're anxious and kind of alert at the same time. So if you are somebody who is, you know, dealing with anxiety, always has issues with anxiety, maybe you're taking anti-anxiety medication, or you just had issues with anxiety in the past, caffeine can kind of increase that central nervous system alertness, which of course will potentially increase your overall anxiety. So if you are, I shouldn't say anxiety sensitive, but if you are somebody who deals with having kind of poor anxiety control throughout your life, caffeine 100% will not help with that at all. And if you're somebody who has very bad panic attacks, I would highly recommend, from my personal opinion, caffeine might not be the best thing for you to take in large quantities, or maybe at all. In addition to this, if you are somebody who has heart issues, since we did discuss it is a stimulant drug, a stimulant can kind of raise your autonomic nervous system, which basically wakes you up a little bit. And when this happens, it can increase your overall heart rate a little bit and put a lot of stress on the heart. A lot of these adaptations do kind of subside very quickly, and what I mean by that is usually in habitual caffeine intake, people who take it all the time, they don't really notice this kind of heart rate increase. So if you are somebody who hasn't done caffeine for a while and you have heart issues and you are just taking a bunch, there could be some potential complications. But if you're taking kind of a low dose of caffeine, or even kind of gradually go into it a little more, you probably won't have too many heart issues or really need to concern yourself about this as well. In addition to this, if you are somebody who is pregnant, it might be a good idea to kind of monitor your overall intake of caffeine, as this can affect the baby during the actual development of the baby. So then when it's born, there could be some potential issues. With that said though, there is some kind of emerging research on this. You know, you don't need to fully forgo coffee, but you know, trying to stick to maybe about 100 to 150 milligrams per day. And again, this is going to depend on the individual. I would highly recommend talking to your doctor about it, because your weight is going to be kind of indicative of this. Everyone is a little caffeine tolerant, so whoever you're going to see for your overall baby health, if you are watching this and you are currently pregnant or know somebody who's pregnant, something you would definitely want to consider talking to your baby doctor about. One of the other things too that happens a lot with coffee or caffeine is people get some GI distress. And This GI distress actually is somewhat of a good thing, and we'll discuss later in the podcast why coffee actually makes you poop. But there might be some GI distress when you consume it. You might notice, you feel like you need to go, and this is just something to consider. But also too, I wouldn't say this is a bad thing, especially if coffee or caffeine is making you go. That can help to keep you a little bit regular. So kind of a negative, but also a negative that could lead into a positive, because of course you don't want to just be blocked up and constipated all day. And caffeine can actually help kind of get rid of that. If you are somebody who has seizures, or somebody who has seizures, since, as we discussed at the beginning, caffeine is a stimulant drug, this can increase the chances of seizures happening. So usually a lot of times individuals who have any type of seizures, it's recommended to kind of forego caffeine consumption altogether. Maybe you can get away with a little bit of, again, this is going to be something you'd want to talk to a dietitian about, and potentially whoever's prescribing you the seizure medication. If you are taking seizure medication, I would talk to them as well. But just something to consider. When it comes to the overall time caffeine is in your body, we use a term called half-life. And half-life is essentially how long it takes for about half of the dose of whatever you take. And this could be food. In this case, we're talking about caffeine. Half-life is how long it takes for half of that overall dose to be out of your body. So usually when we're talking about caffeine, we're talking about a milligram dose. So let's say you have 100 milligrams of caffeine at noon. 6 hours later, or at 6 p.m., you would have 50 milligrams of caffeine still in your system. The crazy thing about this is that means that the quarter life is 12 hours. So at midnight, when you're about to go to sleep, if you consumed 100 milligrams of caffeine at noon, you will still have 25 milligrams of caffeine in your body. And I think that's pretty insane, and something that a lot of people don't realize when they're starting to intake more caffeine in their daily life. For most individuals, moderate intake is okay. It's going to be highly individualized. Some people are more caffeine tolerant. They can take more caffeine. They can quote unquote withstand more caffeine. I feel like I'm pretty caffeine tolerant for the most part. It takes a lot to kind of have me feel that buzz. There's other people who they take, maybe just one cup of tea and they feel buzz, they feel energy. These are the same people who might have some anxiety issues, so they're just very caffeine sensitive. This is something that you'll have to play around with yourself and really find out what actually works the best for you, what's too much, what's too little, and there's going to be a lot of individualized preference. With habitual caffeine use, you may notice some small decline in overall perception of how well it works, so you might feel like you need a little bit more. When we're talking about how long it takes to kind of get back to baseline, usually it's about 1 week. Again, this is going to depend on how much caffeine you're taking, how sensitive you are. Really, it's very individualized. But overall, caffeine, not the worst thing. There could be some potential huge health issues with chronic use of caffeine. And that's a big thing I want to reiterate to all of you who are watching.